Hey my friends, I hope you're all doing well. Today I've got another round of behind the scenes WoW Classic exploration. So last time I explained how we move between different terrain maps each time we either change continents or zone into dungeons or go through any type of an instance change, and how the WMOs, the world model objects, are used for structures from small buildings to caves, all the way up to large cities and of course dungeons. And then we looked at how some of the dungeons have a dedicated terrain map, like Blackwing Lair map 469, and then how some have no terrain because the entire thing is just housed within its WMO, like map 229, Blackrock Spire. So today I'm looking at the coolest example of all of this, Naxxramas. So we're going to go through exploring the dedicated Nax map here in a moment, but again, it's useful to understand the associated models first. So some of you probably know that despite being the last dungeon that was released in WoW Vanilla, Nax was actually envisioned really early on in WoW's development, and it was one of those raids that was originally going to be entered into from within another one of the late game 5-man dungeons, just like Molten Core, which we would have originally entered into through the bottom of Blackrock Depths, and BWL that we would have originally entered into just past Ren's room here in UBRS. Naxxramas was originally intended to be entered into inside Stratholme, and even in the current classic build on our PCs, there are no model files called Naxxramas, so we have to look at the Stratholme models. And if we go one by one, we can start off here with the first model. It's just called Stratholme. And this was the original dungeon at launch. And you would enter here at the bottom. You could make your way around to the left and go to the live side, or you could move the other direction. And you could also have entered over in the side entrance over here once you had the key. You'd clear these 3 ziggurats, you'd clear the Baron here, and then in the original model, this small gate where a bunch of skeletons ran out had a raid instance portal, behind which was this area with an unfinished Naxxramas Citadel in the air where you would have originally entered into or been in the raid. The second model, Stratholme A, was just the main entrance model that was laid in, or actually it's used in 2 places in the game, but it was primarily laid into Map 0, Eastern Kingdoms, right here in North EPL. And it included just a little section of the burning Stratholme buildings that you never really saw much of. The third model, Stratholme B, was just a copy of the original dungeon model, but with the only change being the removal of the piece we just looked at, the unfinished Nax model and the little area below it. Now the tunnel just after the Baron ends, and this was changed when they updated the entry method to Nax that I'll hit on in a little bit. Next to a Stratholme C, it's just a backdoor entrance in EPL that you'd unlock to get to Baron quicker. And finally, we had Stratholme Raid, which of course is just their name for the Naxxramas Raid. So here it is in all of its glory, the Naxxramas model, and it's for sure one of the most detailed and amazing models in the game. It's a very sort of symmetrical layout. You'd zone in into the central area, then you'd make your way through 4 different quadrants, and in each you'd have to fight several bosses to sort of get to the outer ring that housed the toughest bosses, and then you'd finish that boss and you'd teleport back to the center and move on to the next of the 4 wings. And this model truly had some of the coolest large rooms that were set up for some of the most awesome, unique encounters.
All right, so just the briefest of walkthroughs of this model. You had to clear all 4 quadrants or wings in order to access the last area with the last 2 bosses. You could do them technically in any order, but there was like a typical order of easiest to hardest that we would do back in the day, just while we were gearing and things. But guilds much later did it in a completely different order. Typically, you would start in the spider wing here. You'd make your way through the little spider packs here and up to a Nubricon's room. You would then double back, come through this little room and down here to Grand Widow's room over here. And this is just a good spot to illustrate how big this model really is. This looks like one of the smallest rooms in the model. But if we zoom down into it, you see this was actually just a giant room with lots of mobs, and the entire 40-man group would be all spread out in here and raiding. And it's just one small piece of this massive model. So after Grand Widow, you'd make your way around through here to the outer ring. You have to get to the center of the outer ring in this area. And then in here, you'd fight Myexna. And that's an interesting room. It's much taller than you think when you're actually in there. And that's because you're actually fighting on top of web. And they had a big, deep section below to really give that illusion of being up high on some webs. So very cool encounter. After that, you'd teleport back to the center and then most of the time do A-bomb wing next. So you'd make your way up this way, cut through the slimes, come down around over through here. And this sort of reverse J-shaped area is where Patchwork would be padding. Defeat Patchwork, head into this room, fight Grobulus. After that, you'd go upstairs and cross over this area again, the same room that you were in before, go through the little pipe and drop down into Gluth's room. And then after Gluth, you'd cross over sort of the outer ring here and into Thaddeus's huge room here. After Thaddeus, you'd teleport back to the center. And then typically you'd do military quarter, this lower area here, or what's called DK quarter sometimes. Make your way through this first room into this sort of larger room here where you'd fight Vesuvius down in this area. And again, it's another area where it looks like a mid-sized room in the model. But if you zoom into it, it was just this giant area where you'd come out on this balcony, you'd make your way down here, fight the horses, come around here, clear the packs, and fight Vesuvius down here. So this is just a massive area when you're inside the dungeon. After that, you'd clear through the weapons here, through this little hallway, and into this sort of double-sided room where you'd fight Gothic. And then you'd make your way again to this outer ring area. Had to get to the center of the outer ring, and then the Four Horsemen's big room was here. And incidentally, these outer rings, they were always considered separate, like you would never connect them, but technically they did connect by little slime tunnels that if you could survive, you could actually swim through and make your way around from one outer ring to the next. Next would typically be the Plague Quarter, but again, you could do these in any order. The sort of A team or pro team in my guild actually does the military quarter first. But in Plague Quarter, you'd start off in the first little room here, come down the ramp here, and you'd be into Noth's room. And then you'd come through sort of this little, almost like a gauntlet area, wind your way around, and this round room was where Hygen was, where you'd have to do the dance. And then last, you'd come through here, and again, it'd be back to the outer ring, and you didn't have to go through a whole lot of it. You would just cross over and could go and fight Lotheb last. So once you'd cleared all four wings, you then would have activated the four portals in the center area, which activates the new portal on top and allows you to transport to a different model from Stratholme Raid into Frostworm Final. And that's this model here. Again, another one of just the coolest models in the entire game. Two big rooms, you probably recognize it. The big room for Saf, and then a little tunnel connecting to KT's room over here. In Saf's room, when you first got in there, you'd teleport into this sort of chamber here. It looks like kind of a bigger room, but actually you'd teleport into this little ziggurat-shaped structure inside. And here's where everyone was talking about getting their frost resist on and getting ready. And then you'd go through the door into what, for my money, is maybe one of the absolute coolest rooms in all of Vanilla WoW. You had the bones of Saf here forming in this amazing skull room. You'd fight Saf, go through the tunnel, and then you would end up in KT's room that had sort of these 6 little alcoves for phase 1 where you'd fight different mobs that would spawn and come at you toward the center, and 4 of them were open, as you can see here, which is important when we look at this model in the map.
And that's the two models that make up the Naxx dungeon. So let's talk about how you get in and what sort of happens. So most of you know that you never actually zoned into Naxx inside Stratholme. I like to think I was sort of a part of the reason why this type of thing changed. I have a very distinct memory of steamrolling through Blackrock Depths in late January 2005 in a 40-man raid to get down to the raid portal because there was no teleporting into MC. And even then, we thought it was fun, but we had just sort of trivialized what was otherwise a really awesome dungeon in BRD, and it was sort of just a waste of time. So in March of 2005, Blizzard finally added the guy that teleports you into MC, and then much later when Naxx was released, they moved it out of the Strath, the entrance out of Strath, and they put a portal on the ground in EPL. So what happens when you take that portal? Well, you move from map 0, Eastern Kingdoms, to map 533, Naxxramas here.
All right, so switching gears a little bit, we end up inside map 533, but of course, inside the world model object right here, where we teleported. But instead, let's go to areas outside the model object, say here, this first chunk here. And here we are, of course, in this like largely sort of unfinished zone that would be these northern chunks that are copies of EPL from map 0 up here. Moving around a little bit, we see this area that is the unfinished area that would be below where the Stratholme dungeon is. And in fact, before we get into the Nax stuff that you can see there in the distance, you can see there's the front of Stratholme. And remember I mentioned that Stratholme Model A is used in 2 spots in the game. Well, it's actually dropped into map 533 here. And I had said there's a little bit of the Stratholme buildings inside, which you can't see. And that's because, as we saw with Stormwind and other models, certain models are made in such a way that there are view portals that you need to be within so that you can only see them or they render from while you are inside them. So if we get a little closer, sure enough, we can see that here are these few burning buildings, again, within the Nax instance, but the burning buildings at the start of Stratholme. And if we get ourselves out of that little section, it disappears because we're not within that view portal piece of it. So next time you're in Naxxramas, say near Thaddeus's room back up here, know that there's a mini section of Stratholme right below you, which is where we are here. Okay, so let's look at the EPL portion of this map. So now we're in the EPL copy of the Nax map in this sort of section here facing the center, which would be right here. And like before, these large models don't all render in unless you're within their view portals, but some of the sections either don't have those rules applied, like certain doors that you'll see all the time and other effects. And then certain times they pop in and pop out like this. So there's the center. And if I actually go above, so now I'm high up above the model, sort of in this western area here. If I look to my left, I can see these 2 chargers that are the things that are charging up the 2 mobs that you kill before you kill Thaddeus. And there's Thaddeus down there. This big section here that we're looking at. If we move back toward the center, you can see down to the EPL section. And then this would be the area where Patch is going to be padding along. There we go. So this is a neat spot. Patchwork would be down there somewhere. Not quite sure. I'm not quite close enough for him to render in. And then this over here would be Grobulus's room. And then you can see sections of where you'd go upstairs after you killed him and come across and run through the tunnel here and jump out down into Gluth's room on your way into Thaddeus. I can tell this is the center because these are the 3 portals. And there they rendered in. These are the 3 portals that you complete each time you finish one of the 4 wings so that you unlock the portal on top to get into the secondary area. Here we are above what would be, I guess, the military quarter or DK quarter, depending on what you like to call it. Down in here, there's a good view. The first section that you come in, then you cross here. You're up on this sort of balcony area. You go down the ramp, you clear all the horse guys in the stables here, and then you make your way over and you clear Vesuvius over here. And what's cool about the map is that now we're in sort of this section. We looked at where the DK section and looked at where Vesuvius was here. You'd make your way back toward the 4 horsemen room, which is back here. And it was over these mountains. And for whatever reason, the door to the 4 horsemen renders in, which is this door here. But all the mountains are shaved off. And it's shaved off just to make room for the model, which is so big that it took over big sections of EPL where we are. And now I've clipped into a section of this. Can't quite see the horseman room. It should be down below me here. And there it is. And there they are down there. There's a little better view. So when you move along like this, and you get in and out of these sort of view portals, you can see how this model is just laid on top of this copy of EPL. There'd be a Gothic's room over there, the 2 sections. There's sort of an interesting effect, right? For whatever reason, the slime where you dance in Huygens' room all shows, even though the model doesn't quite render in. It's like the slime was down below the model, because when it renders in, I can't see it, but when I'm out, I can. And like maybe during the encounter, it shoots up higher. Who knows? So there is a little bit about how the model is laid over EPL. And then probably one of the most interesting things in any of these map files that I've ever seen is the fact that usually these are all copies of the main map 0 or 1, Eastern Kingdoms or Kalimdor, but this one is custom with these snowy sections over here. There's Lotheb there, which means that we're like roughly in this spot right here. And if we continue to make our way east, we can see that on top of the EPL map, look, there's the back door going into Stratholme. That's actually in here too, which means that in this map 533, they've included a section of Stratholme Model C here. But what's so interesting is you can tell that they just put in completely different texture or completely different terrain map with completely different altitudes or heights right next to EPL. And of course, the reason is that they need the snowy area, the backdrop, for the few little instances of where you can see outside of Saf's room, which would be here, and KT's room, which for whatever reason does render in, even though you're not sort of seeing it. And you can actually see the unformed bones of Saphir there. And here we're in the snow. And what I found is that I originally thought this was like an original map that they just sort of plopped on top of this section of EPL. But what they really did was, if I go to map 1, Kalimdor, and zoom in on this section of Winterspring, I'll actually take a quick snapshot of it. And if I do sort of this side-by-side view, you could see that they had taken sections of Winterspring and copied it into this Naxxramas map. And because maybe they didn't want to have this section with sort of the frost saber area on the left that was too identifiable, they've instead rotated sections of what would be northeast Winterspring in a couple different rotations and just pasted them on to make this section of the map only for the sole purpose of when you're in KT's room at the end or after you've cleared them and you're looking through the 4 windows that are in those 4 sections behind the mobs that come in phase 1, so that you can look out and see the snowy area where that supposedly is. And if I carefully get over so that I'm inside the view portal, I can see the room pop into existence there, and the SAF model, which of course in its entirety looks like this. And a few other sort of exploration points with this map. If I continue to the east, the border isn't quite the border of the map, which you can see this little strip over here is actually real land way down here. And if I continue south, I get back into the core sort of EPL area, coming down along like this. And there's a full copy of Light's Hope Chapel that again is inside the Nax instance. We reach the southern border of the map. Again, the snowy areas were just placed in at, I'm guessing, their original Winterspring elevation. So the wall up to them looks like that. It would be like this spot here. That actually dips down there as if we were next to a Winterspring mountain where the elevation on the side of it went lower. And then you have this sort of zigzag texture, the EPL texture.
And that's how the 2 Naxxramas models are laid out, how they fit into their dedicated terrain map, and a little bit about what's going on when you run this epic raid. So folks, I'm not blowing smoke here. I genuinely appreciate every one of you that clicks on and watches one of these videos. You guys rule. I hope you're all having a great day. Thanks so much for watching.